Sometimes you can't eat, you can't sleep, you simply have to do something about the fact that people on the internet are wrong. I've linked to an article on the Guardian website down below, written by an illustrious fellow of the name Ewan Morrison. I encourage you to peruse said article and then come back and watch my face once more as I begin upon a comprehensive list of why everything he said is wrong. So, for those of you who don't want to delve into the unending paragraphs of his article, let me summarise it as such. Morrison, inspired by the hugely successful fanfiction piece 50 Shades of Grey, has basically written a dirge to originality. His work in various ways snidely tars the writing he considers to suit this category, and generally draws a huge barrier between derivative fiction, which is written by fans, and original fiction, which in Morrison's opinion seems to strike like lightning from the heavens to superior men. There were a lot of things that irked me about this piece. There's a lot of build-up in it. Morrison seems to try and lead us through a history of fanfiction, with the fanfiction ABC thrown in there as well. He spends a good number of words listing terms and explaining acronyms, generally unnecessarily. As someone who spent time on the internet before, I just felt hugely patronised, and the general impression that his constant name-dropping left me with was that he was desperately trying to persuade us that he had the authority to make his ultimate spurious claims. His history of fanfiction is hugely selective and warped. Now, I agree that to a certain extent all history is selected and thus creates rather than reveals. However, the bias in Morrison's presentation was so inescapable. Firstly, his blasé referral to the Bible as fanfiction. It's just a poor proposition. Morrison himself says that you can't consider fanfiction in the same terms before the 18th century due to the lack of the established concept of the author, and I would add to that a lack of distinction between what we nowadays consider fact and fiction. Yet he does so anyway. His choice of a religious document to compound with what he clearly views as an inferior class of writing, rather than, say, history or writing as he is in a newspaper, journalism, ends up coming across as him simply trying to garner controversy. It's less that he stumbled upon an interesting parallel, and more that he wants a catchy tagline. There were some glaring examples of works that would tick all the boxes of fanfiction, but seemed missed from Morrison's list because they were good. I will give him some credit for his mention of Folktales and of Shakespeare. However, he doesn't at all explore the implications of these stories' lasting popularity. Something I'm actually reading at the moment and finding really interesting is Bettelheim's The Uses of Enchantment. Within this book, the author considers the psychological uses children can find for fairy tales, and Bettelheim is nothing if not a fairy tale purist. He rallies against the censored and prettied up versions of the tales that modern-day society seems to view as more appropriate, and instead holds up folktales in their natural form, so created by oral tradition, and says these are the pinnacle of their existence. Bettelheim's argument is that the subtleties of these tales are there to cater for specific needs in the human subconscious, that these tales have evolved to contain these vitally important elements through countless retellings, that oral tradition, like fanfiction, was a melting pot, in which these stories could become their most perfect selves, hence their longevity. There are also forms in which multiple writers are the norm. For instance, comic books. Stories like Batman, Spider-Man, the X-Men, they're constantly taken in new directions, restarted in alternative universes, all according to who new has taken up the reins. That's completely acceptable, and arguably can produce better versions of the original stories. Beyond this, Morrison's article, throughout and through various forms of rhetoric, constantly demonises fanfiction. He mentions at the start that some people think that fanfiction is the lowest point we've reached in culture, yet it's clear as he goes on that he means to imply something of this himself. One of the crudest manners in which he does this is a constant alignment of fanfiction to pornography, paedophilia, and sexual violence. Now, I'm not going to deny that such topics exist in fanfiction writing, that fanfiction as a barrierless, low-brow form has become a place in which people can explore sexuality, yet Morrison's article necessarily pairs them. For instance, comes in the form of sentences like, "These have also been crossed over with characters from other films and books, some of which are paedophilic in nature." The additional fact that paedophilic crossovers exist had nothing to do with what Morrison was saying. It would be akin to me saying that Mexico is a large country in North America in which rape sometimes happens. I didn't need to say that. Of course, it's true, but having said it as such, my audience will now align the first subject of my sentence with the second and think that they necessarily have a particular connection, which you guys can see obviously isn't true in either case. Morrison just added that little dig to further smear fanfiction as a horrible scourge on culture. Another implication of Morrison's article is a firm set divide between author and fan. He really paints fandoms very poorly, especially in a line talking about the recent publication and mass market appeal of 50 Shades of Grey, saying, "They can now sell this content to each other." Such a line really implies a subset of human beings that read and write fanfiction and thus are lower than those that read and write original fiction, like Morrison himself. Yet that implication ignores the fact that many published and well-respected authors started off in the most typical sense of the word as fanfiction writers. Morrison himself mentions that Isaac Asimov was a big part of the early 20th century sci-fi communities, and anyone who reads YA will know that Jida Jones, Holly Black, Cassandra Clare, all of these authors cut their teeth on fanfiction. My argument is that fanfiction should be seen as a natural writing exercise, as its equivalent in music is. Shouldn't you play some Brahms before first composing yourself? Ultimately, above and beyond everything else that irritates me about this article is Morrison's exaltation of the original, because simply put, I do not think the original exists. Everything is the product of what has come before it. Yes, some pieces are more derivative of one particular source than others, but the idea of any book being entirely and completely original is just fancy. Morrison's ultimate dig at E.L. James is that she's not an author, just another cog in the 6,000-strong machine writing works of that type. To which I must respond that yes, she is. But only so much so that Shakespeare is not an author, rewriting all those stories, and that anyone writing in the science fiction genre or crime genre, and according to all those tropes, is not an author. That one of my favourite authors of all time, Jasper Fforde, is not an author, because his works include Dickens's character, Mrs. Havisham, the well-explored device of time travel, and the convention of slapstick. One of the books I'm reading at the moment is Tree of Codes by Jonathan Safran Foer. I will tell you now that this is an amazing book, as almost everything written by Safran Foer is, and if you get the opportunity to read it, you really, really should. The interesting thing about this book is that, in a way, it wasn't written by Safran Foer. Every word in this book appears in The Street of Crocodiles by Bruno Schulz. What Safran Foer has done is take the original text and cut away extraneous words. He's written the book from within The Street of Crocodiles. In a manner, this work is entirely derivative of that text, and yet realistically Safran Foer has brought much else to it, as fanfiction writers bring to their borrowed characters and settings, as any reader brings to words encountered on a page. So this, like fanfiction, is derivative of a previous work and a previous author. Yet I haven't read something so original in quite a while. When we consider what is truly without outside influence, we realise that everything is fanfiction to a greater or lesser extent. And as such, we shouldn't fear, as Morrison seems to, a death of culture that has been brought to us by the internet giving us a space in which to write. We should glory in this new forum upon which people can explore their own personal experiences of reading, be inspired by other people's ideas, and generally rework stories and genres and tropes in the constant creation of new things to read. Fanfiction is not the destruction of the original, it's the continued creation of it. Leave me some comments down below telling me what you think of what I said and that article and fanfiction and originality in general. I'd love to hear from you all. I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.